Good morning and welcome. I'm Dr. Angela Jackson, founder of Future Forward, and I'm so glad that you're joining us for this conversation. Retention Redefined, how leading companies are supporting frontline talent. For Future Forward, we're a research firm, and what we do is really focus on helping companies design workforce strategies that drive both business outcomes and employee well-being. We work with organizations across sectors and really thinking about how we put people at the center. Because we know when people and employees thrive, the business also thrives. And I also want to be clear here that we're not just here to talk about feel good HR practices, which are important, but what we're really wanting to talk about and get clear on in this webinar is focusing on the business imperative and ROI case for these practices and well being. So what we're going to do is take a look at what some of the best companies are doing to invest in their workers, and especially some of these tactics and benefits, especially help with turnover for frontline workers. And we're going to look at the ROI that it unlocks in terms of reduced turnover, increased productivity, stronger company culture. We're talking real dollars and cents. And this research and analysis is done on my research of over 1,700 companies, small, medium, and large, the ones that are investing in their people differently and are reaping the ROI benefits. So before we get started, I'd love to acknowledge who we have in the room today. So we had over 100 professionals sign up for this webinar, representing more than 75 organizations across sectors in retail, healthcare, manufacturing, education, philanthropy, tech, and government. Collectively, the organizations that have signed up to be interested in this idea represent millions of workers across the US and globally. And so that really tells me one thing, that we are not alone in tackling these issues, that there's a growing wave of leaders like yourself who really understand that investing in talent is not just a perk, it's really a strategy for resistance and growth and resilience and growth. So, what I'd love to do is just talk to you today about where we are headed in terms of the conversation. So, I will quickly, if my technology works, share my screen. Let's see. Excellent. Share. Not that share, but another share. So, what we'll do in terms of the agenda is we're going to go over the framework that I have designed with colleagues called the Win-Win Workplace Framework. So, we'll give an overview of what this framework looks like. In addition to that, there's going to be a case study from Zeelo that we will talk about. And then there will be a live Q&A. And we'll also have tools to support your talent strategy. So, let's get into it in this moment. So, why does this matter? If we talk about high turnover today, 60% of the turnover rate on the front line for industries annually, 60% of workers are turning over. This is important because high turnover on some of the frontline employees was taken as a given versus really thinking about how we can change and shift that number. And the strategies we're going to talk about really have a meaningful impact in reducing these numbers. The second is worker engagement. What we're looking at is that 45% of frontline workers report feeling disengaged and unsupported. That actually contrasts, if you talk to most CEOs and management teams, you will see that that disengagement number actually goes down, and these CEOs and leaders really feel like they're actual employees, that they're investing in that. And so what we've realized is that there's a disconnect between what employers and leaders are doing and what actual workers are feeling and what matters most to them. The second thing is we want to talk about the business imperative. As most of you on this call know, turnover costs U.S. businesses over $1 trillion a year. I've seen with my research and work that this does not have to be the case, that there are simple strategies that we can apply that helps to reduce this number. So while we get started, I want to talk about the win-win workplace. framework. This strategy covers off on 9 pillars that we have seen people really engage in and really think about applying these strategies. So I will go over them quickly. So one is centering employee voice. So making sure that we know what matters most to employees. This is very different than thinking what matters most to the company that you want to know from employees. So this is bigger than that annual survey, but really thinking about the processes that we can put together to actually increase the amount of listening and finding out what matters most to employees. This number 2 pillar is win-win relationships. So how do we be in relationship in a very different way that is more humanistic and really shows rank and file employees that they're being invested in? The third pillar is that all voices matter. We call this intersectional strategies because really understanding that in the old world of work, anything that happened at home personally, we would just check that at the door. We saw at COVID that that doesn't work anymore. Our business is only as strong as our, healthiest employees, and just really understanding what can we do to address some of the barriers to work that employees have outside of work, that as a workplace that we can address some of those as a strategy. Part of that is number 4, reimagining benefits. So really understanding what benefits are needed for today's workers to really engage in work. Number 5 is really thinking about how do we activate our frontline leaders. We don't call them frontline managers, really thinking about how we can use them in different ways. The second thing that we want to think about is how we hire and how we hire differently. And then really thinking about how do we actually, once we hire people in different ways, as someone told me recently, hiring people in surprising packages, how do we keep them engaged and keep building what we call number 7, a deep talent bench? And number 8, really thinking about how do we take what we're doing and begin to really measure this so that we can actually see the ROI and find out what's working and what's not working, and that we're building strategies and people strategies that are based on continuous learning and iteration. Last that we talk about is distributed leadership, really making everyone in the company feel like they're part of leadership and they have something to contribute. So these are the 9 pillars of the win-win workplace. Most companies start with centering employee voice, and then based on what they hear, they will go to one of the other strategies, 2 through 9, and apply those to see where there's a business opportunity or to address a challenge that they're having. So what we're going to talk about today is that reimagining benefits. When I did my work in over 1,700 companies, I also stood up a worker advisory board where we had workers who are representative across the United States with different types of barriers to employment. Some were independent parents, some were justice involved, some were caring for elderly family members. And what I saw was really clear that the companies where people actually thrived were acknowledging these barriers that people had outside of work, and they were thinking about innovative ways that they could help these employees tackle some of these issues in service of them being present and at full productivity and working. I'll give you an example. We're going to talk about transportation today, but really also thinking about workers and transportation and how much workers are annually spending just to get to work. Average employees are spending literally per week and per year 30% of their after-tax income on transportation, and that's one example. So what are frontline workers telling us about what they need? Transportation is a big one, as I just mentioned. They also talk about flexibility, and this is really key when we're talking about our return to office. Many times when I'm talking to senior leaders, the conversation around return to work and hybrid is about people just don't want to come to the office. When we actually surveyed workers, they would tell us the flexibility that's offered by some type of remote and hybrid schedule allows them to avoid, commutes to work, which in Boston, I keep hearing that we have the number 1 worst traffic in the country. I know some of you all might argue with that, but also they tell us how important it is if they don't have reliable childcare to be able to get their child on the bus. They tell us about how much money they're able to save when they're able to make lunch at home. And so these are things that we just want to think about and talk about as we are crafting our return to office schedules. And even if we're asking people to come hybrid, the other thing they tell us is, we want to make sure that what we're coming in to do is not sit on Zoom screens. And so if you all are interested in more than that, we're going to do another webinar on return to office. The other thing that they're telling us, even at the front lines, is that they really want to grow. That a lot of times that the training that they get in investments are really based on the job they're doing today versus what they need to grow in their own careers. So transportation is a barrier for work. We have a partner in the work called Empower Work. And conversations that they had from January to June over this year, talking to almost 5,000 workers, 21%, over 21% said transportation was a major barrier to work. And that was 1 in 5 conversations that they had with employees. And these were employees at all levels of the organization. They said things like they didn't have a car, they needed a car, that they worked too far from the job, or they couldn't get to work. If you look at the actual quotes here, they say, I lost work due to distance and not having a vehicle. I lost my car and now it's harder to get to work. And no reliable transportation, no nearby jobs, and no one to help. So this is a main thing that's top of mind with employees today, and really understanding as an employer, how could we address that to help our employees, but what could be the ROI that we're seeing in addressing that, which we'll talk about in a moment. So what we say is retention is the new ROI. How can we unlock 100 to $200 million in value through culture and workforce investments? So this gives an example as we break this down, and this is to all of our people who love math in the world. What we're building with our research is the case for ROI. And so really assuming when doing the math, understanding how much retention is costing us. As I went out and did my conversation with over 1,700 companies, I was really astounded that many companies didn't have a real tight grip on what attrition is costing them, especially at the front line. So we were recently working with a manufacturing company, and they gave us their data for over 13,000 employees. And what they found out with voluntary attrition, that over 4,500 of their employees were leaving annually. If we talked about the replacement cost that they averaged at 50% of their salary, what we're looking at as a total annual attrition is $113 million. Now, I just want to key and say these are employees who voluntarily left, not ones that were terminated for cause. And so what this employer thought was, what if we were to reduce that 35% attrition down to 10% or 20%? What could that savings be? And what we estimated was 48 to 81 million. And if you look at not only beyond attrition, you see presentism, and that's really employees who are saying they're at work, but their mind is in other places. And it's one of the largest costs of attrition. So really thinking about what are the dollars saved in actually addressing this, and what are the programs that really help in terms of training, in terms of employee support, in terms of community building that actually help. So with that, I want to bring my colleague on, Barney Williams, who's the co-founder of Zeelo. In looking at Zeelo as a transportation as a benefit, we've learned that they've had great strides with their companies across different sectors in tackling this issue of frontline turnover and overall employee retention. With that, Barney, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Angela, and thanks for featuring Zeelo in the book. Your framework has certainly inspired, how we serve our customers and support them with their workforces. So I really appreciate that. It's great to be on this webinar, and thanks to those who are listening, giving up their precious time to listen to us today. Hopefully, we'll make it as insightful as possible. So I'm going to run through a few slides that touch on what insights we've learned at Zeelo over the last 8 years of serving, thousands of frontline and corporate workers with transportation issues. So I'm Barney Williams. I'm one of the co-founders of the business, and we'll through these slides we'll kind of look into how businesses we work with think about transportation as a business critical tool, and how they track the return on investment of the programs that they operate. Transportation is an issue that, executed in the right way, will touch on many of the principles that Angela, you bring to life with your framework, and we'll kind of dive through a few real life examples of how companies think about it. So I'm also going to try and make sure my tech works and share my screen. Okay, great. Hopefully you can all see this. Um, So firstly, maybe just to dive into Zeelo's mission. So our mission is to empower opportunity through transportation. We believe that poor transportation is having a negative impact on business productivity, and that's kind of for numerous reasons. So the first is obviously public transit can be very limited, especially in the US market, where we see many frontline workers are traveling to rural areas to get to large warehouse locations, corporate campuses are expanding in rural locations, and that's putting pressure on the public transit network. We've also seen a big boom in subsidies for companies expanding their warehouse distribution and corporate presence in areas that require economic development. You know, lots of offers being given to those companies, and transportation is trying to catch up, which is obviously further increasing that challenge for the workers to travel each day. In addition to public transit, the cost of fuel and car ownership is really increasing, which is putting further pressure on employers, especially the employees who are earning minimum wage, as Andrew alluded to. It's a big percentage of their pay each week. And this challenge that we've identified is backed by statistics that we've looked at through kind of various research that we've been conducting over the last 8 years. So this data you can see here comes from numerous sources. The main one being a national survey which interviewed 7,000 people across 30 states on their commuting experiences. And there's some real like striking data here, as you can see, which supports our mission as a business, which is obviously empowering that opportunity through transportation. So 62% of US workers in this survey chose not to apply for a role because of the length of the commute, which obviously supports a trend in workforces that are being placed in more rural areas. 34% of job seekers actually turned down a job offer due to the commute challenges. And then 23% of US workers have left the job because of the so-called bad commute. And I think these data points, really highlight the challenges that employers face. And like we certainly believe transportation is becoming a C-suite challenge that needs to be addressed for businesses to ultimately succeed. So if we move to the next slide, we start to dive into sort of the impact that this transportation challenge actually has on business. We always like to relate, the challenge to the business outcome, and what we see is that this is increasingly becoming a challenge that often gets overlooked. Transportation can create turnover issues where employees quit their roles because the commute is getting too expensive or it's unreliable. Another challenge that we kind of commonly hear is that businesses, especially in rural areas, want to attract new pools of employees as they can saturate local towns with hiring efforts. So if there's a new location where they want to hire from to widen their employment pool, sometimes they're actually reluctant to do this because they know transportation is going to be a barrier for that person or that individual to actually even apply for the role. And lastly, absenteeism, because of unreliable transportation, can have a significant impact on productivity and output, and really start to cost businesses money. And we've seen this in numerous examples across our portfolio of customers. So one example that kind of springs to mind is that we work with a client that cited that once a month, at least 10% of the workforce don't show due to unreliable transportation. And they related that cost to a missed output of production, and that cost them around $30,000 per day that happens. So you can see that this is becoming kind of really critical challenges that we believe employers need to address and support their workforce. It's not just to support the workforce, but ultimately to support the business outcomes that they're trying to achieve. So the good news is that, and as Andrew, you pointed out in your book, we're certainly starting to see forward-thinking employers think about this challenge strategically, and seeing transportation as a benefit that they can't afford not to offer. And the good news about transportation is that it has lots of different benefits, not just kind of outcome for the businesses, but it can also, on challenges such as recruitment and retention, but it also can help employers stand out as an employer of choice. And we can see here that poor commute can lead to massive increased stress levels for the workforce, and really impact the mental well-being of employees, especially when we see that commuting costs, as you can see here, are reaching kind of record rates. So from our research in 2025, it's predicted that commuting will cost the average American $12,000 a year. And if you're someone earning, $15 to $20 an hour, that is a significant percentage of your earnings. And this is only continue to increase, while wages are actually staying relatively flat from our research. Um, we kind of back this up. So in 2024, our team conducted a survey to identify how transportation supported employees' mental health, and the statistics were really encouraging, actually. So you can see here 87% agreed or strongly agreed that a transportation program improved their well-being. This was mostly down to reduced financial stress, number one, and also two, actually getting back time in their commute. Spending a bit of time relaxing when previously they would be finding that quite a stressful moment. And then 98% of them agreed that it was a critical component for them to get to work, which is also really encouraging. So before I go on to the next slide, what we want to do now is just show the audience how some of our customers are solving their employees' commuting challenges and how they're driving business performance, but also a positive ROI from just investing in transportation. I've got a couple of examples. The first is from the UK, a country where there is seemingly good public transportation. And Tesco, as you can see here, is the leading supermarket chain in the UK. And this case study also featured in Dr. Jackson's book as well, so I thought it was a relevant example. So Tesco has a total of 20 distribution centres, each hiring on average around 1,000 people across three shifts. We actually work with two distribution centres that have had challenges with turnover, and mainly due to mobility issues and transportation issues. So the issues were kind of interesting. So first, they had a limited parking, so there was 200 spaces for every 1,000 employees, which meant employees were forced to look for other alternatives. But the challenge was that the alternatives were not catered around the shift patterns at the location. So they were normally, slightly early or late shifts, which meant that public transportation didn't run during those times. So the employees were effectively stuck. And this was causing big kind of issues. So uh, Dr. Jackson mentioned 60% turnover. In this example, they had 70% in annual turnover, which is having a massive knock-on impact to their production output, and also very costly when it came to the site to rehire employees on a consistent basis. So what we did was we put our data platform to work. So we have an in-house data platform. We call it Rena internally. So what Rena does is it analyzes the address data of the employee population. It assesses public transportation options available to those employees. But more importantly, it looks into demographic data of key strategic areas and builds programs that's going to fit around the shift patterns at each location. And what this did was this gave Tesco insights for them to be able to direct certain routes and transportation services in a certain way that was not only going to serve their population, but open up other populations where they could focus their hiring efforts. And on top of this, Tesco also decided to actually charge their employees so that they had what they kind of class skin in the game. And so the employees paid for each trip that they traveled on. The rates were set at a pretty reasonable rate, which meant it was still attractive to riders compared to the alternatives, but it also reduced the subsidy that Tesco would have to pay. I think the rate was around $7 for a round trip, so pretty reasonable. When we look at the impact we've had, it's been pretty substantial actually, and Tesco are seeing positive ROI on the program, which is great to see. So firstly, what we did was we monitored the retention rates of riders versus non-riders, and we're seeing a 5% reduction in the turnover rate from this pool of employees that are traveling on Zeelo. There's an average of 240 riders utilizing the program daily, each paying at $7, as I mentioned, which is contributing nearly 80% coverage of the overall investment in transportation, really reducing the subsidy that Tesco are having to put into the program. Then what we did was we tracked the amount of employees that are retained due to transportation, which is around 12 per month, which sounds small, but when you relate that to how much it costs them to hire a new employee, which they estimate around $3,000, it meant the savings equated to over $400,000 annually. And this means that Tesco overall, when you take away the transportation costs, are getting a 300,000 return on their transportation investment, plus also the benefits of saving them time from the hiring that goes into rehiring people that churn. And as an additional benefit, 94% of the riders have reported an improvement in their mental well-being thanks to the reduced stress of commuting. So this is like our utopia moment for us at Zeelo. We call it the double bottom line impact, where we're having both financial and social benefits for the businesses we work with and to the workforces. So this is a really great example and very relevant to the transportation, the benefit point that Angela made at the start. Next, we're going to jump over the pond to Pittsburgh, where we're working with a leading US food production organization. So this company is slightly smaller than Tesco. It has 5 production facilities with sites ranging from 250 employees to 1,000 employees. They came to us with a pretty clear challenge, actually. Absenteeism was a big issue for them. It was approaching 10% each day, and this was mainly due to a temporary workforce solution that they had in place. So they were kind of bringing in employees ad hoc on a day-to-day basis, and that inconsistency was really bringing in employees that weren't up to the kind of standard that they expected, and causing stress on the output. They conducted an internal survey, and from their own research, transportation came as the kind of biggest reason that those employees weren't actually converting to a full-time worker. And when you kind of dive into it, the workers were relying on each other for rides, and with no consistency in their schedule, this was leading to a workforce not being able to make it in each day. And on top of this, as you'll see in the next slide, there is pretty limited public transport in that area. That's mainly due to the location of the site being in a rural area outside the city, which is just north of Pittsburgh. So what do we do about it? Again, utilizing our data platform, we identified the core areas, as you can see here, where those temporary workers that didn't convert to full-time workers were traveling from. And we put in a 10-stop solution that connected the south of Pittsburgh to the site. So you can see the site in this map here with the flag. It's a very rural location outside the city, and there's no public transport options, as I mentioned. So the employees contribute a smaller amount to ride each day, just like the Tesco employees. And again, the program is tailored around the shift patterns, so make sure they arrive on time. The riders get an app and also a physical pass that they can use to scan onto the vehicles, which provides us with data and insights that we can give back to our customers, which is really, really important. But one of the benefits they also saw was it actually provided frontline visibility for leaders, so they could see what their shift coverage would be in real time. And if it was lower than expected, they can make emergency plans to get ahead of the challenge, which is a really great additional benefit that we kind of realized after running the program. And if we dive into the impact on ROI, it's been pretty incredible, actually. And what we've managed to achieve is convert all those temporary workers to a full-time position. And really due to the fact they now have they have the confidence that there is a reliable ride for them each day. And actually, when you look at the cost saving, it's pretty substantial. So obviously, using a temporary agency was driving up hiring costs. So they estimate actually $1 million of annual savings from the removal of those temporary agencies and their additional fees. They were doing 2 hiring rounds per year. So you can see that has kind of substantial cost savings. But what I think has been actually the most impressive, and when we speak to customers, we hear this a lot, is that the tenure of those riders has been over 2 years versus a 6-month baseline, which was their norm. So you can see this is really adding benefit to that workforce and reducing the amount of times that employer is having to go out and hire. So it's saving them time, money, but it also allows the organization to build a culture around those frontline workers, which in those sorts of environments is really critical. And I think Angela alluded to that in her book as well. So hopefully that gives everyone a good flavor of how our customers think about transportation, and it being really like more than just a line item, a kind of cost item in their budget, but a strategic lever that is giving them positive return and solving business critical challenges, which is what we're here to do. So Angela, thanks for that. I'll pass back over to you.
Excellent. My video will be started in 1 second. But while I'm coming on, what I'd love to do is just a couple of things. For those of you in the audience, we're going to come to you for questions. And Barney, I have a couple of questions, just taking moderator's privilege that we can be able to talk about. So I'll have Meiji spotlight me, and then we'll be in conversation together.
Great.
So, when you're talking about this, Barney, and we're looking at transportation as a benefit, a lot of the research that we've done at Future Forward, we've talked about how small benefits can have a major difference. Can you talk about how the companies you're working with, when they're seeing these savings, how are they thinking about paying for benefits like transportation?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think ultimately it comes down to the ROI that they're expecting from the investment. So it really starts with understanding the pain that they're trying to solve, and then like zeroing in on that. And that could be production impacts of absenteeism, cost to hire, or even if they have a current transportation program, like is that giving them the return on investment that they require? And then once we understand that, we really dive into the data to understand what goals we can align on when it comes to the ridership that's expected using our data platform, so they can see the impact there. And then I think what's important is like understanding the business language, like in terms of how do these companies talk about their efficiency, right? So and then relating the transportation spend to that KPI. So like for example, we have a grocery client in the US in the Northeast, and they measure every investment they make against their what they call cost per case, which is basically the cost to the business to load a pallet onto a truck, right? But when you break it down to that level, it's a pretty small investment for a great return. And we support that by building out ROI models and to show that return and kind of pass the CFO test. And then on top of that, employers can fully subsidize the program if they want to, if that's going to give them a positive outcome. Um, they may, as I mentioned in the presentation, they may choose to charge the riders a small amount. And actually, this can, when you drive ridership up, this can actually really help reduce the subsidy overall. So that goes into the business case and supports the ROI model that we build for the clients.
That's really helpful. And a lot that we talk about in our research and book, and I mentioned this in pillar one of the framework, is centering employee voice. So you're doing rides for lots of people, but like, how do you actually center the feedback of employees? Like, what say do they get in the routes that you're doing?
Yeah. Yeah, good question. So, I mean, ultimately, we're serving those people, so feedback is like 100% critical, right? And we collect lots of data. So, we support our customers with surveys to kind of get the employee voice part of our decision making. But also, like, during the program, we collect lots of data. So we collect rider feedback via our application and through our support channels. And then we have an in-house team that is collating all that data, and also assessing the actual ridership data on a kind of weekly and monthly basis. So if we get consistent feedback on a certain stop not feeling safe or not in the right area, or if we're seeing data that suggests that actually this vehicle is a certain capacity, we act on that and optimize the program over time. So using the feedback alongside the data to make sure that we're optimizing the program to really benefit the employees. And I think like when we launch programs, I've never seen kind of one that stays the same after like 90 days. They always evolve based on the rider feedback. And we like to kind of really ingrain ourselves in the DNA of each location that we work with. I think it's really important to understand how people are feeling on the ground, right, and really understand and listening. And that helps us then build a program that's going to drive more ridership, have a better impact for the business long term.
Now, when I talked about the case study with the manufacturer and talking about how they saw that they could save 100 to 200 million dollars on turnover, the big question I always get from CEOs and leadership is like, how do we actually pay for this? Is an employer paying for all of it? Are some employees, spending and helping, or is the company subsidizing? Can you talk about like the shared cost model? You can talk about transportation, but I could see that actually being in other areas as well when we're thinking about reimagining benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the two examples that I shared there, the employees are paying a contribution to the program, right? And we see a mix. We see a mix of a lot of our customers fully subsidize the program if the pain is really strong and they want to solve it quickly. But others use copay models, and that could be the like fixed fares or distance based, which is what we saw in the Tesco example, where the employees are paying for like one-off trips or subscriptions on passes that they pay for a period of time. And then some even use like a tiered approach where maybe they offer it free to the employees for a period just to make sure people are kind of understanding how the program is being used and get to grips with the service day to day. And then start introducing kind of a smaller fee. I mean, the decisions typically depend on, the budget and how transportation kind of stacks up compared to other benefits that company is offering their employees. But yeah, we certainly see a mix of people fully subsidizing and then also a kind of co-pay model with the employees.
And so what I'm taking away from you is that it's creativity, right? It's not going to be one size fits all, but we want to center the employee voice and really think about what is that model that's going to actually maximize like use of that benefit. In this discussion, it's transportation. So I have one more question, and then we're going to go through to the audience. So if you have questions now, you're in the audience, start putting those in the chat, and then we will come to you. But Barney, my last question for you is that implementing new benefits like this, being creative, and some of these are benefits that aren't traditionally offered by employers, that really requires a mindset shift. And so, would love to hear from you how you've seen it work to help business leaders see commutes or seeing investing in people being able to actually get to work, not as just a cost, but really as a lever for engagement and for performance.
Yeah, it's $1 million question actually. And it comes up a lot. And I think that the first thing is that, we certainly see by starting to kind of reframe the challenge in terms of what the business cares about, is it retention, is it absenteeism, is it production gaps? Like that helps kind of set the frame the conversation in a way that isn't just like, hey, I'm going to spend loads of money on a bus service, right? It's I'm going to spend money on solving this problem. Um, and then we also have we're lucky because we have lots of great data that shows that we've made impacts in the past. So using real data to make that happen. So here's the impact on your bottom line if 5% fewer people churn, right? And you relate it to that business challenge. Um, or positioning the transport as a tool to widen the labor pool and increase shift coverage, whatever it may be. And using real life examples really helps. And then showing examples that are relatable. So we have customers within certain verticals that we work with, grocery, financial corporate HQs, right, where we can share real life examples of how other businesses have thought about it. And I think that helps gain trust with business leaders, knowing that other world-class businesses are investing in this and seeing positive ROI. And then also, as I mentioned previously, like understanding the business KPIs and how the transportation investment relates to that KPI and how what impact it can have against that KPI.
That's exactly right. And I just want to say, as a resource, if people are interested, we have access to case studies that I've written directly, that talk about businesses across different sectors and how they're using benefits to actually increase engagement, to reduce turnover. If you're interested, we're happy to, as a follow-up to this, to share some of those. If you reach out and let us know what sector you're in, we can share with you what some of your peers are doing. So with that, I want to turn it to the audience. We had one question that came in. One person's asking for the recording. So yes, this is going to be recorded. We are going to send this out afterwards. So the first question that came in here is, how do you build leadership buy-in around prioritizing frontline talent, especially when budgets are tight? I'll kick this off, Barney, and then I'd love for you to weigh in. What we've seen most successfully with businesses who are doing this, there's typically been one champion within the organization, and they've seen something that's maybe affecting one of their teams. They've gone out and like tested it to see if that issue, I'll give you one example, is around elderly caregiving. As we know, we're in a multi-generational workforce right now. We have more and more employees who are caring for their kids, but also caring for their aging parents. And so in another financial firm, there was one person who had that encounter shared that experience, and had a couple teammates that were just reporting some of the stress and burnout and extra labor they had. And so this manager went out and talked to a couple other managers and just very informally seeing if that what they were seeing around this, if they were seeing this same phenomenon on their team. They did. And what they were able to do was begin to survey more and take that data to leadership and say, of our teams, this is how many people we talk to. This is what we're hearing from our employees. And so I think really what we have seen work really well is leading with the data. So yes, one, you might know there's a problem or have an inkling, really quantifying how big of a problem this is, and then quantifying like what is it really costing people. We'll have a lot of qualitative anecdotal things of what it costs, but then also we'll have a lot of like real time costs that people will have. And then begin to think, is there something that the company could do to help solve this problem? In the case of this financial firm, they actually created a new ERG group around caregiving. They looked at their benefits and they had childcare. What they did was expanded that to caregiving in general so that people who had aging parents could take advantage of this benefit. So that's one example of seeing how it pays for itself. Barney, I don't know if there's anything you would add.
No, I think that's exactly right. And just a couple of thoughts for me. I think that the thing that we like to encourage people to do is like showing the cost of doing nothing. Like if they don't do anything, like what's the impact, right? And that's obviously going to be a pain they're trying to solve. Um, One other story that I actually really like from our experiences is that one of the and I agree on the point that champions that really understand this problem are really important, because there may be a disconnect between someone at like a site level versus a corporate level, right? And one of our customers actually um, work with their leader, and they actually encourage them to visit the site, and they said to them, try and commute to our location without having a car, and it was like virtually impossible. And so this person physically tried to do this and realized how big the problem was. So actually, encouraging leadership to visit and listen and actually interact in these kind of challenges. I think like seeing is believing ultimately. And so that was a real nice example of someone that like went above and beyond to demonstrate the challenge that the site was facing. And then that led to them getting buy-in, understanding the kind of the business impact and working on a partnership. So that was a great example.
I really love that example. I'll tell you, I write about in one of the first chapters in the book, Centering Employee Voice. There was a new management team took over, and what they did was they went in and did drive-alongs with their drivers, right? Their delivery drivers to understand like what were their frustrations. And it was funny, there with previous management, one of the drivers tried to get them to change the routes because he saw that it was inefficient. And literally, management was pushing back against it. New management came in, looked at all the routes, and they found out this driver was right, that the routes were inefficient. But had they not actually listened, and that's the centering employee voice, and then took the extra step to go on those drive-alongs, like they wouldn't have been able to see it for themselves. So that's really powerful. And we're thinking about enlisting others, like really bringing them and having them experience the problem for themselves. We have another question here. It says, for organizations that are beginning to rethink talent strategies, what's the most impactful place to start? So Barney, I'll let you kick off on this one, but looking at across all types of organizations. And so I would just be curious for you, even beyond talent, based on your work with companies, what happens if you're thinking about beginning to rethink your talent strategies?
Yeah, so I think the question where's the most impactful place to start, I think centered around I think it was pillar four, or maybe pillar three, sorry, I'm not sure. But talk to your people, right? That is the most important thing. Ask them what's making life hard. And beyond transportation, we hear about childcare issues. We hear about financial issues as well. Um, so I think that's like for me the most obvious place to start. And then thinking about those challenges and aligning the benefit strategy against those real life barriers that people face, right? That could be commuting, it could be the childcare, it could be just stability on traveling each day. And then fundamentally prioritize those benefits that are going to improve those points, improve attendance, improve morale, think about the retention first piece that we mentioned. So yeah, I think listening and then aligning the strategy around those pain points is obviously critical to any strategy, and then starting at that point and evolving from there.
I love that. And I just have to say, a lot of companies, they're doing the annual, they'll say, oh, we do an annual review and survey of our employees. We're in a very dynamic environment now as we're talking to workers. If you think about, changing legislation, if you think about headwinds, if you think about, we're in the midst of, heavy political climate and wars and goes on and on and on, we have to be listening more often. Listening once a year is just not enough. Best case scenarios I've seen with companies, they're doing pulse surveys of a percentage of their employees on a weekly basis. They're taking those insights using generative AI and they're feeding those insights real time to their managers so they can begin and really make this listening dynamic. The worst thing is, and I've seen this with employees, that they give all of their advice, you say you're listening, but they don't see anything that changes. So if I leave anyone with anything, make sure you're closing the loop on those conversations. We have another question, and I love this one. And honestly, this question sets up for why I really appreciate the work that you're doing at Zeelo. Dennis asked, how does one sidestep undercutting the various vehicle partners, operators who have the capacity to provide transport services? So if you could just talk about a little bit, Barney, about how you're working with these drivers and transportation services that do have extra capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, a driver challenge is actually a very common challenge in the industry. And Zelo's model works in a way where we have access to a wide network of operators, which reduces that risk. So, we have thousands of operators sign up to our platform, which basically widens our scope of vehicles and drivers that we can utilize. So, for any given customer that we work with, we may not have one operator, we may have three or four. And that provides us with obviously consistency in the driver network and a bit more scale. But also it provides a bunch of flexibility because we know that frontline workers or even corporate environments change regularly. So if vehicle size needs to increase, if routes needs to change, if we need to add more vehicles because there's demand during a peak period, which we certainly see like during things like July 4th weekend or Christmas or Thanksgiving. We have that flexibility in the network. So, and I think that by us being kind of asset light, that helps with that kind of pool of drivers that we have access to.
Yeah, and I think it's great because you are tapping drivers, companies that have extra capacity. So that's another investment in the communities because these are typically local community businesses that are doing that. So one last question that came up was just metrics. It says, what should companies track and know if their frontline investment strategies are really working? So the biggest one is usage. So really looking at and seeing who is using the benefits and saying who's not using them and looking at disaggregating that data. There's certain benefits that people will need at different life stages that actually mean more to them at that life stage. So if you're, in your emerging leader thinking about your first, family planning is going to be, very important. If you have an older that's may be a bit older, they're thinking about their retirement. They're thinking about financial literacy. So really understanding who and who is not using the benefit and really doing the math around that and saying, what does this benefit cost versus how many people are using it? If it's underutilized, really thinking about could there be another offering that would actually matter more to the employees? And that's really important because it also has a higher perceived value in that. I'll give you just a really quick story. We had one employer that offered 401k to all of their frontline workers. It was underutilized. They were able to do a survey like we suggested, and they found out the frontline workers really appreciated that. But there were other things that they needed more. They talked about rising rents. They talked about school fees. And what this particular employer did was open up a cash emergency fund. So reallocated some of those dollars that they would use for 401k and put that in an emergency fund for workers if they really needed them. And when we went back and talked to these workers, that had a higher perceived values. Workers said things to us like, I feel like they're supporting me. I believe that they're invested in me. And it was taking dollars they were already using it but putting it in a different way and a benefit that mattered most to the employees today.
Awesome. Yeah, I just add to that. I think like baselines are really important. Like tracking before and after. It seems obvious, but like making sure you really understand like where you're currently at with your KPI that you're trying to your metric you're trying to work on. One thing that actually we hear a lot is like referral rates for employees can are
Mm.
actually it's a great metric because if employees start recommending you, like you know what you're doing is working. And that sometimes can go a bit forgotten about that metric, but we see that a lot with some of our customers who are thinking about are the benefits that I'm investing in, is it actually working, or how do I know it's actually working? And that's a great one to look at. I think one thing you mentioned around the kind of quick fire questions are super important. Like I don't think annual surveys, I think they're kind of thing of the past. It's like a one question pulse kind of check weekly on a certain topic. Like we've certainly seen that to be really powerful data and tells a story pretty quickly.
And I love that because these things, again, we have some small and medium-sized businesses on the phone. They may not have resources like large organizations, but this is what you can do with a text message. This is what you can do with a quick Google survey. And with, agentic AI, we can do a quick analysis on how many people responded, what were the sentiments that came out of that. And so I think in this moment, this is a moment that where technology is meeting it, that we can actually make meaning of all the data that we have. So with that we are actually at time, and what I want to do is first of all thank everyone for coming on. As we put in some of the advertisements, we have a couple of offers, gifts that we would like to share with you. So everyone that attended this live, if you take a look here and let's see, continue to share, and you'll see the QR code. If you complete the Google form, what we will do is mail you a book, courtesy of our friends at Zeelo, of the Win-Win Workplace book. So you can fill that out. Second, Zeelo has really offered generously that if there's a company and you think that transportation could be a good fit, that they will do an analysis of your area about what that would look like. Barney, do you want to say a bit more about that and who they should contact?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are basically offering a kind of free consultation for each location. So if you have a certain site or corporate office that you think may benefit from something like this, we can work with you to get some data from you, and then do like quite a kind of deep dive in terms of the demographic data around that particular site or location, and give you a pack that kind of says. This is what a transportation program could look like for your site based on all these kind of this demographic data, and this address data, and then also how an the start of an ROI model could look like for you as well. So it's quite a comprehensive pack that we can deliver. So more than happy to do that. I think if you I think there's contact details here from Emily and our team. You can reach out to me directly on LinkedIn, or just go to the Zeelo website where you'll see different forms that you can fill in as well. Someone of our team will get in touch with you. But please message me directly. I'm happy to pick anything up.
Excellent. And so the last thing I just wanted to share with everyone is here, if I pull back up my screen, it was working really good, is we have a couple things here. We saw that what we'd love to do is for you to stay in touch with us. This is how we can kind of keep the momentum going here. This is my contact on LinkedIn. This is the book. What we'll do is we'll follow up with the recording. Any resources that mentioned, you can get in touch with us. Also, Barney, I just want to thank you and Zeelo for being such great partners. To everyone that's listening, at Future Forward Institute, we're able to research companies because we have partners who share their data, that share the turnover, so that we can actually prove out this ROI case. So any companies that are interested in doing this work, analysis, us coming in at no cost, and helping you figure out this turnover, and being willing for us to tell your story, even if it's anonymized, we would love to be in contact with you. We really feel that we can build a movement around really getting clear on what the ROI on investing in employees look like. So if you have any questions at all, this is our contact information. Please be in touch, and then you will hear from us with a recording of the conversation. Barney, thank you again to you and your colleagues at Zeelo, and thank you to everyone who's attended.